Welcome to Catholic Writers Every Catholic Should Read. Today's Catholic writer is J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
Yes, we have with us Sister Maria Grace Dateno, who is the very first Tolkien nerd I ever met. I didn't know there were such things until you started speaking about Tolkien. How long has this been a reality for you?
Well, I love them. I love the books of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit since I read them, which was, I don't remember exactly, but I was like 12 or 13 when I first read them. And it was because my older brother read them, and since he was talking about it so much, then I had to read them too. So ever since then, I think I've been a big fan.
Okay, it seems like they are a series that you have to be introduced to by someone else's enthusiasm.
Yeah. Although my brother, I think he read The Hobbit because he was home from school sick, and he had nothing to read. And my mom had just bought a copy of that for some cousin for her birthday or something, but she just gave it to him instead. And he read it, and he was homesick bored, so that got him started.
Kind of like St. Ignatius of Loyola,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
There's nothing to read around here,
yes.
And your life changes.
That's it.
With this great discovery.
Yeah.
So what is it about, so reading The Hobbit, reading The Lord of the Rings, and then you become like all things Tolkien?
It's so hard to express what I love about it and what so many people love. It's fantasy, literature, adventure, so there's just some people that read it just for that, and they don't even see anything else. They just see that it's like a whole world that this author has built, and they just enjoy the adventure, and they love this kind of writing. Most of the other things that they read are probably inspired by this one. So it's kind of like the great book, and even though it's 3 books, it's really one story. The great book of fantasy adventure. But the more you read it, the more you can see the faith of Tolkien is really underlying all of it, even though God is never mentioned in the whole book.
So how do you mean the faith of Tolkien underlies this kind of epic?
Well, you can see that he is. Well, when he talked about it, he said, some people say it's about like good and evil, the struggle of good and evil, or power, and that all those kind of themes are in there, and they're definitely looked at from a Catholic point of view. But he talks about the book as being about death and the desire for deathlessness. He said in one of his letters, his book of letters is really beautiful. One of his letters, he says, it's about death and the desire for deathlessness. In other words, it's written by a man. And he sees this as kind of the issue to talk about.
Immortality.
Yes. Yeah.
And
so in his world, this world of Tolkien, there's a one God, but there's not really any reference to it. In another book, he wrote like the whole prehistory, like all the ancient history. The Silmarillion, yes.
Oh,
yes. So he describes that, but in the book, there's no reference to God. There's the world that they're living in, and there are elves, and there are men and dwarves and other evil creatures. And the elves they are immortal. This is how they were created by God. But the men are not. And there has been forever this envy and desire for immortality on the part of the men, that the humans, that they see the elves have this immortality. And some of the, before the time of the Lord of the Rings, the men, very noble civilization of men that has been given many gifts, but they still like not happy because they don't have this immortality, and they try to like force it, and they ruin things. So there's this
constant, familiar.
Yeah. And even in there's one little line that I always found so amazing, and he's one of the good men in this Lord of the Rings is talking about how the kings that came before him, they became so desirous of long life, and they did have very long lives because they were very noble race of men. They lived a long time, but they were like they looked at their ancestors and they built these kind of great memorials to their ancestors, and they forgot about their children and their sons, and actually the line died off, and that line of kings came to an end. So this is one of the themes, and it's definitely from a Catholic point of view, that men have the gift of death, is called by they were told that, but it doesn't seem like a gift to them because they don't understand about eternal life afterward, which they have, but they don't really think about that. They think about trying to be like elves.
Wow. Yeah. There's a lot. And you're kind of touching on something that I think Tolkien, he coined a new word. Like, we're living in kind of apocalyptic times. Tolkien lived in a sort of apocalyptic time. I mean, he fought in World War I, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so
he watched his sons fight in World War II.
So that's, pretty earth-shattering. Mm-hmm. And yet he didn't speak of the earth shattering. He spoke of kind of a renewal. He spoke of a eucatastrophe instead of a catastrophe, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, that's his phrase that he coined, eucatastrophe. And he uses it like to refer to, like, catastrophe is like the sudden destruction and terrible part of a story, that something comes to a catastrophe. But the eucatastrophe is when there's a sudden good turn to the story, unlooked for, unhoped for, and suddenly there's this hope comes in the story. So he that's definitely a way he thinks stories should be written, that they have that. So there's not like some people die, lots of people die, and some people don't repent, and they die unrepentant, but there's hope that comes, and like it did not seem possible that this could work, and it does, that kind of thing.
Something we might call actual grace. Mm-hmm, so grace in the moment.
Yes, yeah. And part of the grace that you see is I think the most startling storyline with grace is Frodo. He's the hobbit he's the main character in the Lord of the Rings. The main hobbit character, and he has this evil ring that came to him. He didn't want it. He has it, and he's trying to bring it somewhere to destroy it. That's the basic storyline. And there's the evil creature who also wants the ring, Gollum, and he will do anything to get that ring because he's addicted to it. And that Frodo, his older cousin Bilbo, is where he got the ring from. Bilbo could have killed Gollum. He had a chance. He had to escape. He could have killed him and gotten out, but instead he just jumped over him and ran. And he had mercy because he felt pity for him because he was so enslaved to the ring and so miserable. So because Bilbo did not kill Gollum, Gollum is there later, and so that gift of mercy comes back to Frodo as the grace of mercy, because he could not have done what he needed to do in the end without Gollum. Even though Gollum doesn't intend it, that is what that's what happened. So that line of mercy and forgiveness, all of these themes are coming from his faith, his Tolkien's faith.
And it really is. It's a remarkable piece of work just by itself. But then, like you said, he wrote a prehistory to it.
Yeah.
Massive volumes. He wrote the Elvish language for it.
Elvish languages. There's
there's several.
Yes,
I didn't realize
there's
that.
High Elven, and then regular, and then the real low Elven. Quenya, Sindarin. Yeah, there's different Elvish languages.
Dialects.
Yeah. No, they're actually it's kind of like Latin and Italian, like Quenya and Sindarin are related in that kind of way.
I remember reading that at a certain point, Tolkien received a letter from an 11-year-old boy written in Elvish.
Oh, really? Oh, no,
yes, he was delighted. It was, it was like, somebody, I found a kindred spirit.
When he first The Hobbit was the first book was published, and it had in the title page, and it had some of the runes of dwarf. This is dwarvish runes.
So he made all this up.
It's all made up. Yeah, but he wrote the stories came in a way to use the languages. It wasn't like he thought of the languages in order to have this something in the story to make it more authentic. First came the languages, then came a history for them to be in. So this
because he was a philologist.
He was a
wasn't
philologist. Yeah, he really loved.
A philologist, really, literally.
Yes,
a lover
of language.
Yes.
And so the what did you say about the languages before? There's the
they're not dialects.
No, they're different languages. Yeah, and he has even like the hobbits speak the common tongue, but it's represented by English in the book. But he brings all of this to like he keeps accurately. It's all developed. And people kept writing to him and asking him for more information about the languages and the runes and everything, and he was very delighted with it. Yeah,
I can imagine.
Yeah,
and even just on this philology, in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, which one scholar is saying should not be called the Space Trilogy, it should be called the Ramsay Trilogy or the Ransom Trilogy, because of the main character. The main character is a philologist, and they said it's modeled on Tolkien.
Yes, and there's other things modeled on Tolkien in there. Even like he has Maladel and the Eldil. Yeah. That's a rip off of the Eldar, and also I forgot what the other one. He has a couple things in there because Tolkien was supposed to write a time travel trilogy, and C.S. Lewis was supposed to write the space travel trilogy, but Tolkien never wrote his time travel one. But that's what those came from, and they read them out loud in their
gentlemen's
smoking
lounge.
There was a little group of them, the Inklings. They would read their things out loud. And Tolkien, and I recently read a letter, Tolkien writing to the publisher, saying what he thought about the, what's the first one called?
Out of the Silent
Planet, yeah. And the publisher is asking Tolkien's opinion on it, because one reader didn't like it, and so they're thinking about publishing it. And so he waxes eloquent about it. He's just like, well, I'm not really, we think a lot alike, and I've read all this before. But he goes into detail about how good it is and how well it's written. It should be a little longer, but other difficulties that in his first draft he fixed all of them. I love this book, and he goes on and on about how much he loved that one.
And those are classics too.
Yeah,
and
those are.
I was just thinking, like, this is a commercial for C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy or Ransom Trilogy, whatever you want to call it. I think those books are so prescient for our time.
Yeah, the second one is my favorite.
Really?
So, Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra is the second.
I think that Hideous Strength, the pinnacle, it's like so timely.
Yeah,
it's just coming to me. I read the newspaper. It's like it's like that Hideous Strength. Here we are. Every headline.
Yeah,
but even this relationship of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily have C.S. Lewis, the Christian author that we have. I mean, to some degree, if not for that
Tolkien
friendship.
And a friend are the ones who kind of helped him out of his atheism into Christianity. Yeah. And then this whole their whole little academic circle. Yeah. I saw in here a reference to, in a letter to Tolkien, because they would, like I said, they would read them out loud, what they had written. And Tolkien is writing to his son Christopher, who is in the Air Force during World War II. And he sent him a couple chapters from The Lord of the Rings. He sent them as he wrote them to his son to review them. And he said he says, I have got the hero into such a fix that not even an author will be able to extricate him without labor and difficulty. Lewis was moved almost to tears by the last chapter. So he was a great fan and really encouraged Tolkien also. Because Tolkien didn't think people would like it, but Lewis's being such a fan and encouraging him really got him to keep going.
And Lewis enjoyed great literary success throughout his career, so that probably meant a lot. I don't know if Tolkien really had that same experience.
Not at first. And his stuff that he published like translation of Beowulf and stuff like that.
That would not really
not the same kind of popular level.
Yeah.
But at one point, when Tolkien's book was, I think it was Lord of the Rings, he says he asked C.S. Lewis to endorse it, write out what we call an endorsement or a blurb. And C.S. Lewis says, I don't know if it will help it, because at that point he was also unpopular in certain circles. And so he's like, but Tolkien was like, I want you to, so he wrote a whole thing on it. But again, some people attack the book basically talking about C.S. Lewis's blurb, not even having read the book. Yeah.
Oh,
so some circles he was not.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, Tolkien, the Catholic, his upbringing was kind of unusual.
Oh yes, very. Was actually a convert at a very young age.
Sort of a rocking horse Catholic, like Carol Houselander.
Yes, yeah. He was born in South Africa, and his father died when his mother took him and his little brother to England for a visit, and while they were gone, his father died. And his mother, very shortly after that, converted to Catholicism, and angered the family, both her husband's side and her side. Both of them were not happy. There's only a couple who were kind of still friendly. So they had a hard life because they didn't have a lot of means. So so I guess he would have become Catholic when he was just a few years old, maybe like 6 or something. And they lived in the country, and she just taught them at first. And it was only really a few years, but that time in the country marked his whole life.
I can almost see the Shire.
That's the Shire. That's where the feeling of the Shire was that place. Then when he started school, they had to move into Birmingham, into the city, so he could get to school, because they couldn't afford the bus or whatever. So they didn't like it. The boys didn't like it in the city. But that's where his mother Mabel met Father Francis Morgan, who was one of the oratory priests of St. John
in Birmingham.
Yeah. So he was a great support to her and the family, and then she named him the guardian of her sons when she died at a young age. She died in her 30s, I think. Yeah. So and Tolkien kind of considered his mother kind of like a martyr, because he considered that she died because her ill health. She didn't have, because of their poverty, because the family was not supported because of her conversion. He really kind of looked at her that way.
Wow. Yeah. And so then his guardian was a priest.
And yes. And
that's
he was
an unusual way for
an
adolescent.
And it seems like he was very, very affectionate and thoughtful and loved them very much. But he's a priest. He's not, like a mother and a father. But he did, he saw they weren't happy living I think they were living with some aunt who wasn't affectionate at all. And he saw they weren't happy, so he found another place for them to live. And actually, one of the places he would, the boys would get up early, go to service mass, and then have breakfast in the oratory with him, and then go to school.
Got a lot of formation that way too.
Yeah. So he did his best. However, he was not happy when Tolkien met Edith. He fell in love with this girl who lived in the same boarding house where he was living, and it's not really clear, but maybe because she was 3 years older than him, and she was distracting him from his studies. He had to really get a good to get into Oxford. He needed a scholarship because he didn't have money. So he needed to really do well on the entrance exam or whatever, and she was kind of distracting him from his studies. So Father Francis Morgan forbade him to see Edith, and he kind of bent the rules a few times, and then he just laid down the law, you cannot. So until you're 21. And on a minute after midnight on his 21st birthday, he sat down and wrote a letter to Edith. And she had already been engaged to someone else, and she broke it off.
Wow.
And they got married. Yeah, it's a very romantic story.
It is indeed. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think now there's something, the tombstones has some literary thing.
Yes. On her, she died first, and on her tombstone he wrote her name and date, and then Luthien, and then his name would be underneath and say Baron. And that's the story of Luthien was an immortal elf, and Baron was a mortal man who fell in love with her, a forbidden love.
Goodness!
And he had to do all kinds of stuff. Her father demanded
to win her.
Her father demanded him to bring a Silmaril, which that was in an impossible place to get. but he got it with her help and won her hand. And yeah, so it's a beautiful story. And that story, it's like a very primitive version of it, goes way back, way before he wrote any of the things. It was kind of like a early
a trial balloon maybe, or
like something that he developed because of their love, and then later it kind of evolved and became part of the whole prehistory thing.
So we have like a whole life that's kind of informed, that he takes his studies in philology, his experience growing up, early years in the country, the experience in the city, his experience of love, and he forms that into this collection, this whole world that he's able to introduce other people into, and people without even knowing it are welcomed into a Catholic worldview.
It's true. Yes. Yeah. And the way the Shire, where the peaceful, beautiful, simple land where the hobbits live, is kind of like, that's like this main thing. Even though there's all this fighting and other stuff, that's like the important place, and the peace there. And that's modeled after like the common man, because some of the hobbits, in some ways, they're kind of clueless. But they love the simple things of life, and there's no one kills anybody. There's like maybe petty crime, but nothing. They're very peaceful people among themselves. So it's kind of like a view of the goodness of humanity. There's a lot of these little things.
And I think even the idea of, I think Tolkien was very much of harmony with nature.
Yes.
And that's important. I think reading Laudato Si and Pope Francis's recommendations, I think we can find a lot in Tolkien.
Yeah,
that is in harmony with that.
Yes, he was very. You can see in the Lord of the Rings, the bad people are the ones who are like cutting down trees indiscriminately, and even in his real life, he really he hated seeing like trees cut down for no reason and stuff. He loved nature and the country.
And so that the stewardship of creation that was entrusted.
Yes.
It's exemplified in the Shire more than anywhere else.
Yes, yeah. They live in harmony with their surroundings. They farm and they do everything.
They live off the land. Yeah. So all these things altogether are things that I think show why Tolkien is a Catholic writer every Catholic should read.
Definitely.